In July of 1979, the body of Leonard Hayes was discovered at the bottom of a ravine outside the town of Millstone, Alabama. Leonard was 23 years old. He worked second shift at a paper mill, lived with his mother, and was saving to move north. According to the official police report, Leonard had slipped, fallen, and died instantly. The report was completed less than 6 hours after his body was found. No crime scene photos were taken. No witnesses were interviewed. No investigation followed. To Millstone authorities, Leonard Hayes was not a murder victim. He was a line item, a statistic. Problem was quickly resolved. But Leonard's family knew something was wrong. He had been afraid in the weeks leading up to his death. He told his sister about white coworkers who followed him after work, about trucks that slowed when he walked home, about slurs muttered just loud enough to hear. Leonard had asked his mother if she thought he should leave town. The night he died, Leonard never made it home. When police knocked on his mother's door the next morning, they did not ask questions. They delivered a conclusion: accident. But the injuries on Leonard's body told a different story. His skull showed trauma inconsistent with a fall. His knuckles were bruised. His shoes were missing. Tire tracks were visible near the ravine. None of this appeared in the final report. The case was closed before the family could even process the loss. For 40 years, Leonard Hayes officially died by misfortune. But misfortune doesn't erase evidence, and it doesn't silence witnesses. The truth waited decades until someone finally went back and looked. In the months before Leonard Hayes died, his life had begun to narrow. Millstone, Alabama, was not openly violent, but it was quietly hostile. Leonard was one of the few black men working the night shift at the paper mill. He kept his head down, did his job, and avoided confrontation. But avoidance didn't protect him. Coworkers noticed changes. Leonard stopped lingering after shifts. He parked farther away. He asked to switch routes home. When asked why, he gave vague answers. Just being careful, he said. At home, he was more direct. Leonard told his sister that a group of white men had begun waiting near the employee lot after closing. He said they laughed when he passed. Once, someone threw a bottle that shattered near his feet. Another time, a truck followed him for nearly a mile with its headlights off. He considered reporting it. He didn't. Leonard had seen what happened to people who complained. In Millstone, problems didn't get solved, they got remembered. 2 weeks before his death, Leonard spoke to a supervisor about harassment. The supervisor advised him to keep things calm and reminded him that layoffs were coming. Leonard took the message. He began saving aggressively. He asked relatives in Chicago about work opportunities. He planned to leave after the summer. He never got the chance. On the night of July 14, 1979, Leonard clocked out at 11:06 p.m. Multiple employees later confirmed seeing him exit the building alone. What happened after that was never officially recorded. But unofficially, rumors circulated almost immediately. Some said Leonard argued with men near the parking lot. Others claimed they heard shouting near the ravine later that night. One resident reported a truck speeding away shortly before midnight. None of these accounts appear in police records, not because they didn't exist, but because no one came asking. Leonard's family tried to file a complaint after the funeral. They were told the case was closed. Reopening it would only cause trouble. Trouble for whom? The warnings Leonard tried to give were dismissed while he was alive. After his death, they were erased. From the beginning, the physical evidence surrounding Leonard Hayes' death told a story that conflicted with the official explanation. The ravine where Leonard's body was found was shallow, no more than 12 feet deep at its steepest point. Emergency responders later acknowledged that accidental falls in that area rarely resulted in fatal injuries. Yet Leonard's skull showed multiple fractures. Not a single impact, multiple points of trauma. That detail alone should have triggered a homicide investigation. Didn't. Leonard's hands were scraped and bruised, particularly around the knuckles and wrists. Medical experts reviewing the limited documentation decades later noted these injuries were consistent with defensive wounds, signs of a struggle, not a fall. Even more troubling was what was missing. Leonard's shoes were gone. They were not found at the ravine, not along the road, not in nearby brush. Police made no effort to locate them. The absence was never explained, never documented, never questioned. Tire tracks were visible near the edge of the ravine the morning Leonard was discovered. Several residents recalled seeing them clearly before the rain washed them away later that day. No casts were taken, no measurements recorded, no photographs preserved. The coroner's report contained only 3 sentences describing Leonard's injuries. No diagrams, no timelines, no conclusions. Despite this, the death was ruled accidental within hours. Leonard's family requested an independent autopsy. They were told the body had already been released and embalmed. Any further examination, they were warned, would be inconclusive. That warning was not medical. It was procedural. Within days, the site where Leonard was found was altered. County workers graded the shoulder of the road. Vegetation was cleared. Whatever physical evidence remained was destroyed under the guise of routine maintenance. Years later, a retired highway employee admitted that the work had been rushed and unusually specific. "We were told to clean it completely," he said, "like it never happened. If Leonard Hayes' death had been handled like a crime, there would be a trail to follow. There isn't." The Millstone Police Department logged Leonard's death as a non-criminal incident. That single classification decision changed everything. Once labeled accidental, there was no requirement to collect evidence, no obligation to interview witnesses, and no pressure to notify state authorities. The investigation ended before it started. Officer reports from that night are brief and identical, as if copied from one another. Each states that Leonard likely slipped near the roadway and sustained fatal injuries. None mentions the missing shoes. No reference tire tracks. None describes the condition of the body in detail. Most telling is what does not appear anywhere in the file. No timeline, no officer notes, no names of first responders. When Leonard's family asked who made the determination, they were told it was a joint decision. No individual was identified. Accountability dissolved into bureaucracy. At the time, Millstone's police chief, Raymond Keller, had served nearly 15 years. He was known for keeping the peace by avoiding conflict. Former officers later described his approach bluntly. If a case was going to cause problems, it didn't become a case. Leonard's death qualified. Millstone had a long history of racial tension that rarely surfaced in official statistics. Complaints went unfiled. Incidents were downgraded. Records were incomplete by design. When a local pastor attempted to raise concerns during a town meeting, he was cut off mid-sentence. The issue was never placed on the agenda again. Leonard's mother filed a formal request for further review. She received no response. Within 2 weeks, the department archived the file. No suspects were identified. No follow-up was scheduled. No outside agencies were contacted. To the system, Leonard Hayes had become an inconvenience, one that was easier to erase than explain. In Millstone, silence was not simply a lack of speech. It was a learned behavior. After Leonard Hayes' death, people talked, but only in private. Conversations happened behind closed doors, in low voices, and never on record. Everyone seemed to understand the same unspoken rule. Saying nothing was safer than saying the wrong thing. Several residents later admitted they had seen or heard something that night. A raised voice, a truck idling where it didn't belong, a figure running near the ravine. But each of them had reasons not to come forward. One man, a former mill worker, recalled being pulled aside by a supervisor the morning after Leonard's body was found. He was told the company didn't need trouble. Another resident said a police officer casually advised him to keep your family out of this. Fear did the rest. Millstone was small enough that consequences were personal. Jobs could disappear. Loans could be denied. Children could become targets. People who challenged authority found themselves isolated quickly. The black community understood this better than anyone. Leonard's family was warned, indirectly, that continuing to ask questions would only make things harder. Their house was driven past slowly at night. Phones rang and went silent. A rock shattered a window 2 weeks after the funeral. No report was filed. By the end of summer, most people who had known Leonard stopped mentioning his name entirely. Silence became a form of protection, but silence also preserved the lie. Years later, when the FBI reopened the case, agents would discover that witnesses hadn't disappeared. They had been waiting decades for someone powerful enough to listen without consequences. That moment would not come until 40 years later. For decades, Leonard Hayes' death remained buried in a filing system designed to forget it. That changed in 2018. As part of a nationwide review of unresolved civil rights cases from the 1960s through the early 1980s, the FBI's Civil Rights Cold Case Unit began digitizing death records that had been ruled accidental under questionable circumstances. The goal was simple: identify patterns that local departments may have ignored. Leonard's name surfaced because of what wasn't there. A federal analyst flagged the case after noticing that Millstone reported 0 violent deaths for 15 years, a statistical anomaly for any town of its size. Leonard Hayes appeared only once, categorized as an accident with minimal documentation. The absence triggered a deeper review. When FBI agents requested the original case file, they received fewer than 10 pages. No photographs, no sketches, no interview summaries. Entire sections were missing, including the initial responding officer's report. That alone was enough to reopen the case. But what truly drew federal attention was a marginal note discovered in a county ledger, written in pencil nearly erased. Next to Leonard Hayes' name were the words, "Handled locally." To federal investigators, that phrase carried weight. It suggested an intervention. It suggested discretion. It suggested a motive to suppress. The FBI officially reclassified Leonard's death as a potential racially motivated homicide. For the first time in 40 years, the case had a number, a task force, an authority that did not answer to Millstone. Agents returned to the ravine. Though the landscape had changed, forensic mapping revealed the site could not have produced Leonard's injuries through a fall. Ground-penetrating scans showed evidence of soil displacement consistent with a struggle. Then the FBI did something no one had done in 1979. They asked questions and stayed. When the FBI arrived in Millstone, they did not announce their purpose publicly. They didn't need to. People noticed the unfamiliar vehicles. The questions were asked quietly at kitchen tables. The federal badges were shown discreetly, not flashed. And something shifted. For the first time since 1979, witnesses believed that speaking might not cost them everything. The first person to come forward was a former mill employee who had worked the same shift as Leonard Hayes. Now in his 70s, he asked to speak anonymously. He told agents he had seen Leonard arguing with 3 men in the parking lot the night he died. They boxed him in, the man said, not yelling, smiling, like they knew he couldn't do anything. The men were never identified by police, but the witness remembered the truck, dark-colored, lifted, with a cracked rear taillight. Another witness confirmed hearing shouting near the ravine shortly before midnight. She said she had called the police non-emergency line to report it, and was told officers were already aware of the situation. No such call appears in the records. Perhaps most disturbing was the testimony of a former deputy, who agreed to speak only after retirement. He admitted that officers had been instructed to classify Leonard's death as accidental before the scene was even secured. The order came down fast, he said. No paperwork, no mess. When asked who gave the order, the deputy hesitated. Everyone knew, he said, and no one wanted to say it out loud. By the end of the FBI's first month in town, more than a dozen witnesses had given statements. Each corroborated parts of the same story: intimidation, silence, and a death that never should have been ignored. But time had taken its toll. Most of the men believed to be involved were dead. Others had moved away. Evidence had been destroyed. The truth was clearer than ever. By the end of the federal review, the FBI no longer questioned what had happened to Leonard Hayes. They questioned why it had been allowed to happen at all. After analyzing witness statements, forensic reconstructions, and historical patterns, the FBI reached a formal determination. Leonard Hayes had not died by accident. His death was consistent with assault followed by deliberate disposal of the body, motivated by racial hostility. The case was officially reclassified as a racially motivated homicide. That designation carried symbolic weight, but little practical power. Most of the individuals identified by witnesses were deceased. Others could not be placed conclusively at the scene due to destroyed records and elapsed time. Prosecutors acknowledged that no criminal charges could be filed. For Leonard's family, the announcement was both vindication and heartbreak. For 40 years, they had been told they were wrong, that their grief was misdirected, that they should move on. Now the federal government confirmed what they had always known. But it came with an admission no less painful. Justice would not follow. The FBI's final report concluded with carefully chosen language. It acknowledged systemic failure. It cited racial bias. It recognized local obstruction. But it also emphasized limitations, time, evidence, and legal barriers. The report was released quietly. No press conference was held in Millstone. The police department issued no apology. No memorial erected. The town responded with discomfort rather than recklessness. Officials stated they would review internal practices. No one was disciplined. No records were restored. Leonard Hayes' name appeared once more briefly in the news. Then it faded again. In the next chapter, we'll examine how Millstone reacted to the reopening and what the town still refuses to confront. Millstone did not welcome the FBI's conclusions. When the federal report was released, town officials issued a short statement expressing regret for the family's loss, while emphasizing that the events occurred under different standards and circumstances. The wording was careful. No responsibility was accepted. No wrongdoing admitted. Public reaction was divided. Some residents expressed sympathy for Leonard Hayes' family and frustration with the past. Others dismissed the report as outside interference or rewriting history. A few openly questioned why the case had been reopened at all. "It was a different time," became the most common refrain. At a town council meeting held shortly after the report's release, a proposal to place a historical marker acknowledging Leonard Hayes' death was brought forward. The motion failed. Council members cited concerns about community harmony. In private, however, reactions were less restrained. Former residents reported receiving hostile messages after speaking to journalists. One elderly witness who had cooperated with the FBI said his mailbox was vandalized. Another withdrew from public life entirely. The past was not just uncomfortable, it was still dangerous. The police department declined to comment further. Records from the period remained missing. Requests to release additional documents were denied on procedural grounds. Millstone moved on the only way it knew how, by pretending nothing had changed. But outside the town, Leonard Hayes' case began appearing in academic journals, civil rights reports, and national databases. His name joined a growing list of victims whose deaths had been minimized, misclassified, or erased. His story was no longer isolated. It was evidence. Leonard Hayes did not get a trial. He did not get an arrest. He did not get justice in the way most people understand it. But his case changed something that could not be undone. When the FBI reopened Leonard's death 40 years later, it exposed more than a single act of violence. It revealed how systems fail quietly, how racism does not always announce itself with chaos, but with paperwork, silence, and decisions made behind closed doors. Leonard's death was not ignored because it was unclear. It was ignored because acknowledging it would have required accountability. The reopening forced a public record to exist where none had existed before. It placed Leonard's name into federal archives, civil rights databases, and historical registries. It ensured that his death could no longer be dismissed as an accident or forgotten entirely. For investigators, the case became a reference point. Leonard Hayes was cited in later reviews of suspicious accidental deaths across the country. His story helped justify the reopening of dozens of similar cases, many involving black victims whose families had been told for decades that nothing could be done. For Leonard's family, the outcome was bittersweet. They received acknowledgement, not resolution, recognition, not restitution. But for the first time, The official story matched the truth they had lived with all along. Millstone still resists that truth. The ravine remains unmarked. The police records remain incomplete. The town remains quiet, but the silence no longer holds the same power. Because once a case is reopened, even too late, it cannot be fully erased again. Leonard Hayes' death is no longer a footnote. It is a warning, a reminder that justice delayed is not the same as justice denied, but it is justice diminished. And it leaves behind a question that still has no answer. How many other names never made it back into the record at all? The FBI continues to look, and somewhere, buried in forgotten files and sealed archives, more truths are waiting. Leonard Hayes' story did not end when the FBI closed its report. In the years after his case was reclassified, something subtle but significant began to happen across the country. Civil rights investigators started revisiting other deaths that had been written off as accidents, suicides, or unexplained incidents, especially those involving black victims in small towns during the mid-20th century. Leonard's file became a template. His case showed how easily a homicide could be erased without falsifying evidence, by simply failing to document it. No reports meant no contradictions. No investigation meant no accountability. Federal analysts identified dozens of similar patterns. Bodies found near roadways or wooded areas. Rapid accident rulings. A missing photographs. No autopsies. Witnesses never interviewed. In several cases, the FBI reopened investigations decades later and reached the same conclusion they had in Leonard's case. Racially motivated violence followed by institutional silence. Most of those cases ended the same way: no charges, no trials, no punishments. But each reopening added weight to a growing historical record. Together, they formed a map of where justice had failed and how often. Civil rights historians argue that these reopenings matter not because they punish the guilty, but because they correct the narrative. They restore names to the record. They expose how law enforcement practices once functioned and how easily power could override truth. Leonard Hayes' name now appears alongside others in federal reports and academic studies. He is no longer alone in the archive, and that may be the most lasting impact of reopening his case. Because once patterns are documented, they cannot be dismissed as a coincidence. In 2021, more than 40 years after Leonard Hayes was killed, an envelope arrived at a federal records office with no return address. Inside was a single photocopied document. It was a handwritten incident log from the Millstone Police Department, dated July 15, 1979, the night Leonard died. The log listed a call that had never appeared in official records. Disturbance near Route 8 ravine. Multiple males involved. And beneath it was a name. Not a suspect. Not a witness. A supervisor. The name belonged to a man who, until then, had never been publicly connected to Leonard Hayes' case. A man who later rose through local government. A man whose family still held influence in Millstone. The document was authentic, but it was incomplete. The page ended mid-sentence. The remainder of the logbook was missing. When investigators attempted to trace the source of the envelope, they found nothing. No fingerprints, no postal record, no camera footage. The sender had anticipated every step. Federal officials declined to comment publicly. The document was added quietly to Leonard's file, sealed, pending review. No announcement followed. No charges were filed. And no explanation was given for why that page surfaced now. Some believe the sender was a former officer nearing the end of his life. Others think it was someone cleaning out an attic, finally deciding to let go of what they had been holding for decades. Or perhaps it was someone trying to ease a conscience. Whatever the reason, the document changed one thing forever. Leonard Hayes' death was no longer just a failure of the past. It was a secret that survived into the present. And that raises a final, unsettling question. If one missing page could rewrite 40 years of silence, how many others are still out there, waiting, unsent, or deliberately kept hidden? The case is officially closed, but the truth, it seems, is not finished speaking.